So before we get started, the materials that you will need to make this beautiful flower bomb blanket are 2 crochet hooks, 2 separate sizes, a 5mm, which is a US size H or 8, and a 3.5mm hook, US size E or 4. You'll also need scissors, a yarn needle, and optional, for if you're wanting to block your squares, pins and a water spray bottle. We're going to be using double knit yarn, light worsted weight in US terms. For the main contrasting colour, you will need 250 grams. You will need 100 grams of yarn for your 20 main flower motifs, and we call those the A motifs, and you'll need 2 50-gram balls of yarn for your B and C motifs, and you'll need 16 of the B motifs and 4 of the C flower motifs. In this tutorial I have used a combination of Sindar baby bamboo yarn for the B and C motifs, and the main contrasting colour I have used Red Heart for the A motifs, but you can use anything that you would like. The tension for each flower is a 10 cm by 10 cm square. I'm also tailoring this tutorial to incorporate both UK and US terms in relation to the crochet stitches, and I'm hoping that this will make a lot of sense and be useful to our friends across the pond as well. I hope you enjoy the tutorial. Without further ado, let's get set. Okay, so each square for our Daisy Do blanket for you is made up of these lovely little flower motifs in the centre, and that's the first thing that we're going to learn how to do. So each flower motif is exactly the same, it's going to be the same size, we're just going to use various contrasting colours. So I've chosen to do mine in this colour. And the way that we start off is to make what we call an adjustable ring. So I have a tutorial down below if you want to see it in more detail, but basically I wrap the yarn around my fingers, remove the yarn from my fingers so I have a little loop, crisscross loop, pull the yarn through, make it taut and slip stitch through the loop. But there's a much more detailed link to that tutorial down below. Okay, so in this loop what we're going to do now is we're going to make 16 double crochets. So in US terms that would be single crochets, and we're going to be using our 5mm hook that we've already discussed earlier on. So I'm going to continue to do our double crochet. So the way we do that is we pick up our yarn and pull it through the loop. So we have 2 loops on our hook, and then we're going to pick up our yarn again and pull that yarn through the 2 loops. Simple. So again we put our hook through the loop, pick up our yarn and pull it through. So we've got 2 loops on our hook, pick up our yarn again with our hook and pull it through the 2 loops, and there you have 2 double crochets. Again putting our hook through the loop, picking up our yarn and pulling it through. So you have 2 loops on the hook, picking up our yarn, pulling it through the 2 loops. And we're going to continue to do this until we have 16 double crochets, or in US terms single crochets, in our adjustable ring or magic ring. So I'll see you when I've completed my 16 double crochets. Okay, so what I like to do next, before we draw our ring together, what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect the ring by putting our hook through the 2 loops of the first double crochet that we had, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a double crochet, and that's going to be the first stitch of our next row. Now what we can do is, if we pull our loop out a little bit so we don't lose it, and I'll put our hook down, if we turn our ring over, we can get our little end here, and if we give our little end a tug, it will bring our adjustable ring together. Nice big tug, and it brings it a lovely solid ring together, and a really tiny little neat hole in the middle, not a gaping great big one. So it's a lot easier. The reason why I've done this single crochet initially is because it's very difficult to find that first double crochet to connect your ring together once you've pulled your ring together. Okay, so we're going to continue now in our 16 stitches, and we're going to do 16 or 15 more now, because we've already done our first double crochet. So 15 more double crochets all the way around. So we've done one, so this will be 2, exactly the same as we've done before, going into the top of our double crochets and creating another double crochet. So that would be 3 into the top of our double crochets, going into the 2 loops, 4, all the way around until we have another row of 16 double crochets. And then when we get to the end, I'll show you what we need to do next. And these are a little bit smaller, these loops, so I'll see you at the end. Okay, so I have my row of single crochet and double crochet, 16 double crochets completed, and now I'm going to put my hook into the top of the first double crochet, and this time I'm going to just slip stitch, so pulling my loop through and then straight through again without picking up any yarn, and that makes our slip stitch. Now what we're going to do is we're going to chain 1, 2, 3, and we're going to skip the next double crochet, and we're going to double crochet or single crochet in US terms into the next stitch. So we're going to chain 3 again, 1, 2, 3. We're going to miss the next double crochet, and we're going to double crochet into the next top of the next double crochet, putting our yarn through, pulling it through. There you go. We're going to chain 3 again, 1, 2, 3, missing the next double crochet and double crocheting into the top of that double crochet, and we're going to repeat this all the way around until we come to the end. So I'll see you at the end of this row. Okay, so we're almost at the end. So I've just finished doing my 3 chain for my 8th loop, because we've got 7 loops already, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And now what we're going to do is we need to skip a stitch, and we go into this stitch here, the next stitch along, and we're in this one we're just going to slip stitch. So again, as we've done before, we're going to pull our loop through that stitch, and then we're going to continue and pull that through the loop, so that gives us our slip stitch to end. Okay, now what we're going to do is in each of our 8 loops we're going to start and create our lovely petals, and the way we do that is to follow a very simple pattern sequence, and this pattern sequence is made up of a variation of stitches which I'm going to show you now. So the first thing we need to do is we need to, in each one of these little loops here, spaces here, we'll call them spaces, so our chain spaces, we're going to make a double crochet. So in US terms that would be a single crochet. The second stitch that we're going to do is we're going to do a half treble crochet, or in US terms that would be a half double crochet. So we're going to pick up our yarn on our hook, we're going to put our hook through our chain space and pick up another piece of yarn. So now we have 3 stitches on our hook. Now we're going to pick up our yarn and we're going to pull this yarn through all 3 of the stitches, and that is our half treble stitch. So that's our second stitch. The third stitch that we're going to use is a treble crochet, and again very similar to the second one. We're going to pick up our yarn, we're going to put our hook through the 3 chain space, we're going to pick up our yarn, we're going to pull it through, we're going to pick up our yarn again, and instead of going through all 3 loops, we're going to go through the first 2 loops, and then we're going to pick up our yarn and we're going to go through the second loops, and that makes our treble crochet, or in US terms a double crochet. And we're going to do that again now. So picking up our yarn through our 3 chain space, picking up our yarn and pulling it through the chain space, we're going to pick up our yarn and pull it through the first 2 loops, picking up our yarn and pulling it through the second 2 loops. So now we've got the first half of our petal. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go down in height of our stitches. So we've gone up in height and we're going to come down again. So what we need to do is we need to create what we call again our half treble crochet, or in US terms would be our half double crochet. So we need to pick up our yarn, put our hook through our 3 chain space and pull the yarn through. So now we have our 3 loops on the hook, and this time we're going to pick up our yarn and pull it all the way through our 3 loops, and our very last stitch, what we're going to do is we're going to do our double crochet, or in US terms single crochet, which is putting the hook through our 3 chain space, picking up our yarn. So we've got our 2 loops on the hook, we're going to pick up our yarn again and we're going to pull through the 2 loops. And there we have it, our first beautiful little petal. Now what we need to do is we need to chain 1, as we're going to make a little space, and we're going to do the exact same thing again in our next 3 chain space. So what we need to do again is our double crochet. So hook through the 3 chain space, picking up our yarn and pulling through. We have 2 loops on the hook and pulling our yarn through the 2. The next one we're going to do is the half treble crochet. So picking up our yarn, putting it through the 3 chain loop space, pulling the loop or the yarn through, picking up our yarn and pulling through all 3 loops. Then we're going to continue with our treble crochet. So picking up our yarn, putting through our 3 chain space, picking up the yarn and pulling it through. So we now have our 3 loops on the hook, picking up our yarn, and we just pull through the first 2, do you remember? And then picking up our yarn and pulling through the second 2. And we're going to do that again. So we're going to pick up our yarn, we're going to put our hook through the 3 chain space and pulling our yarn through. So we have our 3 loops on the hook. We're going to pick up our yarn again, pulling through just the first 2 loops, and then picking up our yarn and pulling through the second 2 loops. So that's created the second of our treble stitch. Now we're going to, so we've done our half of our petal, and now we're going to continue and create the second half of our petal. We're going to go down in size again. So picking up our yarn, putting our hook through the 3 chain space and pulling our yarn through. So we have our 3 loops on the hook, picking up our yarn again and pulling all the way through our 3 loops. And the last stitch that we're going to do in our 3 chain space is our double crochet, which is putting our hook through the 3 chain space, pulling our yarn through, picking up our yarn and pulling it through the 2 loops. So there we have 2 our 2 petals formed. So in UK terms we have a double crochet, a half treble crochet, 2 treble crochets, and then going back down we have a half treble crochet and then a double crochet. In US terms we have 1 single crochet, a half double crochet, 2 double crochets, then we go back down and we have a half double crochet and a single crochet. I hope that makes sense. So catering for all nations today in our crochet tutorial. Right, so we're going to follow this sequence. So again we need to chain 1, and we're going to follow this stitch sequence, this stitch, the pattern for our petals in each of the 3 chain spaces. So I'm going to catch you when I get to the end here and I'll show you how we finish off. Okay, so we have our 8 petals and I've finished the last stitch in my petal, and now what I need to do just to finish off this flower, this gorgeous little flower, is to basically slip stitch into the first double crochet, or the first single crochet if you're working in US terms. So basically the first crochet, let me just zoom in a little bit so you can see. Oop, trying to zoom in. Okay, there we are. So we have our loop here, and the first double crochet is just here. So we stick our hook through there and we're going to slip stitch into there. So we'll put our hook through that first double crochet, so the first double crochet of our first petal, and we're going to pick up our yarn and pull it through, and then we're going to pull that same piece of yarn through our loop, and there we have it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my scissors, I'm going to snip the end, and I'm going to pull this thread all the way through like so. I'm going to zoom out a little bit so you can see a bit better. And what I like to do before I finish off is just to take my hook, my crochet hook, just pop it through the back of that stitch and just pull that end through, and then you've got it, put my hook down, and then you've got it nicely at the back here. And I like to sew these ends in before I start adding my other colour, my contrasting colour. So that's how you make the flower, and I use these flowers for little garlands and all sorts of things. It's my 8 petal flower. I also have a 5 petal one as well, but it's really simple to make, and they're so gorgeous just on their own, just in all sorts of contrasting bright colours or pastel colours. So they're really lovely. So now what I'm going to do is, if we take a look at our one of our finished squares, is we're going to do this contrasting colour now. We're going to attach this onto our flower and we're going to make our square shape. So we'll come back and we'll do that.